But it's 1,000 drones a day that Putin's got an ambition to do, and the 550 drones and ballistic missiles. Most of them were these Shahed 136 drones that uses an Iranian design. The Russians have adapted it, able to get through the electronic warfare means that are being deployed by the Ukrainians, and put a slightly bigger warhead in it, and different warheads, and they're manufacturing them now in Russia. 550 was the largest combined attack that there had been, the biggest one, and that was on the 4th of July. The one before that, I think, was 537 on the 29th of June. And they've been hitting regularly through June, almost 500 drones and missiles firing in. Of those, you probably 80% plus get shot down of the Shahed 136 drones, because they're relatively slow moving. The Ukrainians have got good methods of shooting them down, but they're hitting civilian targets and causing civilian casualties. The biggest threat are the ballistic missiles, because the only way that the Ukrainians have got to shoot those down is with the US supplied Patriot missile. And it's the ballistic missiles, when they hit a civilian target, cause maximum casualties. Whether Putin can achieve his ambition of 1,000 drones, or his output production to meet 1,000 drones a day or not, is something that there's a bit of a question mark over. The Ukrainians are trying very hard to disrupt his ability to do that. Yeah, the Ukrainians are being very clever in what they're targeting. And the Ukrainians are using an increasing number of drones themselves to attack targets inside Russia. The difference between Ukraine's drone attacks and Russia's drone attacks: a large percentage of Russia's drone attacks attack civilian targets. Ukraine's drone attacks are 100% targeted on Russian military targets, and anything that comes down where there's debris over a city or hit somewhere else tends to have been influenced by Russian defensive electronic warfare. That sends it off target. Ukraine is targeting Russia's depots where they're holding all the drones, the big warehouses where they've got those, but they're also targeting the drone factories and the factories that are manufacturing guidance systems for them, the engines for them, the sites where the explosives are being put together and manufactured as well. So they're being clever and trying to disrupt the supply of components in. And of course, to get these drones, Russia almost certainly still relies on some technical know-how and potentially technical components coming from Iran. And it relies on guidance systems and advanced technologies coming from China. And that's two areas where Ukraine by itself can't disrupt those supply chains. Russia is hugely being propped up by its allies. It can't propagate the war without electronics coming from China. A lot of those come in what are classed as dual-use electronics. So there'll be an innocent system that is for civilian purposes, but if you take the components out of them, they can be used for military purposes. The other area where Russia is getting a lot of its ammunition and some of its missiles from is North Korea. There's increasing evidence of them using North Korean ballistic missiles, and we know that they're using huge amounts of North Korean ammunition in their artillery and rocket systems, and even seeing some North Korean artillery and rocket launch systems. The difference between a Shahed drone, for those that are watching, and a ballistic missile is that a drone flies like a mini aircraft. It is subsonic. It is relatively slow. It's got wings, and it'll fly and be guided like a remote-controlled aircraft. A ballistic missile is a missile that goes up very high and then comes down in what's called a ballistic trajectory. So is coming down much faster than the speed of sound, and is therefore very, very difficult to detect with your radar systems, because it's moving so fast and where it is, and detect in a way that you can get another missile to intercept it, again, because it is coming down so fast. That's why the US Patriot system is the only one that has got a reliable strike rate against ballistic missiles. It's a very awkward time, and the turning off the missiles. It was a batch of weapon supply coming from the United States, which included Patriot missiles. Donald Trump, it appears he didn't know that had been turned off. It appears that this was a decision that was made inside the US Department of Defense. And knowing how Departments of Defense work. It could have been their computer system suddenly going, alert, we've got low stocks of this and low stocks of that. Are you sure you want to send this off? And a relatively low level official saying, halt that shipment because it's going to affect the minimum stocks that we are required to keep for the protection of the United States. Or it could have been a furtherance of what there seems to be is a policy from Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of State for Defense, who is very against supplying US weapons to Ukraine. And he may have made a unilateral decision without clearing it through the White House. The indications that I'm getting are that it was a one-off and it's not a change in policy. And therefore, the United States is almost certainly going to continue to supply weapons, including Patriot missiles. And only the week before this happened, Donald Trump had promised a Ukrainian journalist whose husband was in the Ukrainian military that he would closely look at the supply of Patriot missiles because she had raised an issue about civilian targets being targeted inside Ukraine. And then since then, Donald Trump has turned around and said, after his phone call with Vladimir Putin, that he didn't like the way that went and he doesn't like civilian targets being attacked by the Russians. So I think there isn't a big issue here with supply of weapons. However, we'll see when the next batch is due. Donald Trump is specifically targeting the BRICS nations, which the main founding members are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But there are a lot more members of it. BRICS is trying to set itself up as an alternative economic power base to the EU and to the United States in coming together. The difference between the EU and BRICS is that the EU, no matter what we think, countries try and work together for a common interest. The BRICS nations are all sitting there and going, what's in it for me? What can I get out of it for me? And Donald Trump sees it and some of the noises that are coming out of it. And again, we have to remember it's got Russia and China in it. It's a way of increasing tariffs and trying to break this grouping that is trying to come together in an anti-US way. One of the things they have tried to do is to break the world reliance on the US dollar as an underpinning currency. And again, that will just rile Donald Trump with his, we want to do a deal on America first policy. So I'm not surprised he's targeted it. I'm just surprised he hasn't targeted it much earlier. Putin is having real difficulties in sustaining his war economy, and therefore he's it's impacting Russia's economy, Russia's internal economy more and more. He's managed so far to keep it away from the Russian people, but it's starting to reflect in difficulties with regard to wages being paid. Russian papers only last week reported that there was an increasing number of companies that couldn't afford to pay its workers' wages. The price of goods inside the shops is beginning to go up. The buying of new cars has dramatically decreased in Russia. And again, this has been reported in the Russian papers. So the Russian people are starting to become more aware of the economic impact of its war with Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin, he can probably keep the Russian people on side for another 12 months, 18 months at a push. But the Russian economy could collapse quite easily if the oil price and his ability to sell oil around the world gets impacted even more. But on the other hand, Vladimir Putin can't afford not to have the Russian economy on a war footing and to be supporting the war. So he's caught in the horns of an economic dilemma here. And which way that's going to go is something that is going to play out in the next 12 to 18 months. If Vladimir Putin increases manufacturing capability to 1,000 drones a day and then starts to use those 1,000 drones a day, Ukrainian air defenses are going to have real difficulty keeping up with that. In fact, they won't be able to keep up with that. So that will inevitably mean more civilian casualties.